The first thing that bothered me was that my wife started coming home earlier on the nights she claimed were getting longer. That was wrong in a way I could feel before I could explain it. When you work fire long enough, you get used to that sensation. A room looks normal. The walls are standing. The windows are intact. Nothing obvious is burning. But the air feels wrong. The heat is where it should not be. The silence is too still. You learn not to argue with that feeling. You learn to trust the part of your mind that notices what other people step past. My name is Dustin Harris. I have been with the fire department long enough to make captain, long enough to stop mistaking noise for danger, and long enough to know that most disasters spend a while pretending to be manageable before they show their full shape. My wife, Melody, lived on the opposite side of that rhythm. She was the chief operating officer of a company that was preparing to go public, which meant her days were measured in conference calls, investor decks, legal reviews, executive dinners, and the kind of smiling pressure that made everybody around her feel temporary unless they were useful. We had been together for 12 years. From the outside, we looked like the kind of couple who made hard schedules look elegant. Bronxville house, good furniture, two careers people respected. Separate calendars synced down to the minute. A shared understanding that ambition was not the enemy as long as home still felt like home. For a long time it did. That is one of the things that makes betrayal so insulting. It does not only poison the bad years. It goes backward and tries to ruin the good ones too. Melody had always been the organized one. If our life had a surface, she kept it polished. She knew birthdays, school fundraisers, holiday flights, client dinners, board politics, my 24-hour tour, and the preferred mineral water of people who believed their preferences were a form of personality. I handled the parts of life that broke loudly. Burst pipe, dead battery, roof leak, contractor lying through his teeth. Anything with heat, pressure, timing, or danger made sense to me. We made sense together, at least that was what I had believed, then. In the middle of a month when her company was pushing toward its initial public offering, and every day in our house sounded like somebody using words such as runway, valuation, compliance, and roadshow before breakfast. Melody began arriving home too, early, after telling me she would be late. That sounds small, and it is small at first. I know that. Even now, I know how thin it sounds if you are hearing it from the outside. A wife says she will be home late, and then shows up early. That is not a crime. It is not a confession. It is not even a lie if plans changed. But that is not how it felt. The first time it happened, she texted me just after 5 and said, "Investor prep dinner ran long. Don't wait up if I'm late." I was in the kitchen at a little after 8 reheating leftover chili and watching the local news with the volume low when I heard the garage door. She came in wearing the same charcoal suit she had left in, heels in one hand, hair still smooth, face a little tired but not dinner tired. I mean that literally. I know what a person looks like after 3 hours in a loud restaurant with clients. Their skin carries the room. Their voice sits lower. Their jacket smells like somebody else's kitchen. Melody smelled like her perfume and the outside air. "You're home early," I said. She set her bag on the bench. Dinner got moved up. We wrapped faster than expected. I looked at the clock, then back at her. She smiled the way people smile when they want normal to restart as quickly as possible. "Good," I said. "Want some chili?" "No," she said. We ate a lot. A lot of what I almost asked. I did not. She went upstairs to shower. I rinsed my bowl and stood at the sink longer than the dish required. Then I told myself to knock it off. She had a stressful job. Schedules changed. My own job had taught me not to invent drama in the gap between expectation and reality. The second time it happened, I noticed because of the wine. Melody texted me at around 6 saying she was heading into a strategy session with outside counsel and might be unreachable for the rest of the evening. She came through the front door before 9 with a paper gift bag from a liquor store I knew, one that was nowhere near her office. "What's that?" I asked. "Host gift," she said. "I forgot to bring something for the Sloans thing on Thursday." She set the bag on the dining room table. I could see the neck of a bottle inside. "You had counsel tonight," I said. "I did." Then I remembered the Sloans. She said it lightly, but she was already walking away. Nothing in her tone, nothing in her pace, just a small, efficient answer meant to close a small, efficient question. I let it close, but the next morning, before I left for the station, I looked at the receipt folded in the bag. Bourbon, expensive bourbon, the kind men bought for other men when they wanted to signal respect or access or debt. Melody did not know bourbon from furniture polish. She could fake her way through a wine list, maybe. Bourbon was not her language. Still, I told myself it was for the Sloanes. The husband liked dark liquor. I knew that. He had once spent 20 minutes explaining a bottle to me at a holiday party, while I silently wondered how many ways a man could say oak without feeling embarrassed. By itself, the receipt meant nothing. But in a house already warming in the walls, nothing starts to matter. Before I tell you how I knew I was not imagining it, subscribe to Reddit Ride, like the video, and leave a comment. That support helps the channel grow, and stories like this travel farther when quiet people decide they are worth hearing. I should explain Melody the right way, because women like her are easy to flatten into a type if you are lazy, and laziness is part of how men end up blindsided. She was not cold by nature. That would have been simpler. She could be warm in private, funny in mean little ways that only landed if you knew where the softness was underneath, and generous when nobody was watching. Early in our marriage, when I was still working extra tour and trying to prove myself every single day, she would leave a plate for me in the oven with a note on the counter telling me exactly how long to heat it, and not to ruin it by being a firefighter about dinner. She learned the names of guys on my shifts. She sent flowers to the station after one ugly apartment fire that killed a grandmother and a kid. Nothing extravagant, just white lilies and a card that said, "I know you'll make jokes today. Eat something anyway." I loved her for things like that. Maybe I never stopped. Even after the rest of it, that was part of the problem. I was not dealing with a cartoon villain. I was dealing with the woman who had rubbed my back after bad calls and sat with me in silence when words would have been an insult, which meant when the inconsistencies started, I spent more time fighting myself than investigating her. The next week, I came off a 24 at the station and got home just before 8 in the morning. Melody was already dressed for work in a cream blouse and navy skirt, standing at the kitchen island with her laptop open and one AirPod in. "Morning," she said, tapping at the keyboard. "You look wrecked." "Thanks," I said. I poured coffee and leaned against the counter. "Long night, 3 alarm in Yonkers," she said. "I saw it." "How did you see it?" "Citizen app. Plus Jason texted me." Jason was her general counsel, not the kind of man who texted people about city fires for no reason. That registered, but only for a second. What held longer was the fact that she had supposedly been on a late investor dinner the night before, but her laptop calendar was open in front of me, and the block from 6:30 to 10:30 was labeled Draft Review with Archer, not Investor Dinner. Archer was the outside law firm. I looked at the screen and said nothing. She followed my eyes, clicked to another window, and asked if I wanted eggs. "Too smooth? Too fast?" "No," I said. "I'm good." At the station, one of the younger guys on my shift had once asked me how you know a fire is moving behind a wall. He was talking literally, but the answer works elsewhere too. You do not know from one thing. You know because a dozen tiny things stop agreeing with one another. The smoke says one story. The heat says another. The paint blisters where it should not. The floor feels wrong under the boot. You are not chasing one clue. You are noticing that the environment has lost coherence. That was where I was with Melody, not proof, loss of coherence. For the next 2 weeks I tried not to become a man I would hate. I did not start combing through drawers on the first day. I did not put a tracker in her car. I did not call friends and ask what they had seen. I watched. I listened. I kept going to work. I let my mind do what it does best, which is store small inconsistencies until a pattern either forms or fails. Melody was in full IPO mode by then. Her company, a consumer health tech firm with more branding than substance if you asked me, had turned its executive team into a traveling theater troupe. Investor lunches in Manhattan, media coaching in Midtown, late-night deck revisions, off-site dinners in Westchester houses belonging to board members who liked to pretend they were still founders. She talked about all of it the way paramedics talk about traffic, as something exhausting and inevitable. But her excuses kept mixing in ways that made the whole fabric fray. One night she told me the leadership team was having a private dinner with bankers in the city, and she might sleep at the apartment the company kept for senior staff. Fine, that happened sometimes. The next morning, she walked into our kitchen before 7 wearing the same dress as the evening before, carrying a garment bag and a coffee from a place on the opposite side of our town from the train station she would have used. Thought you stayed in the city, I said. I did for a few hours, she said, setting down the coffee. Then I came back. Couldn't sleep there. On the train. Car service. Since when does the company send car service back to Bronxville at 3 in the morning? She bent to take off her shoes and said, since they need me functional. It was good, quick, plausible, but she said it while looking at the floor. Another time, she mentioned a dinner at a private club with potential institutional investors. 2 days later, while folding laundry because the woman who helped us had been out with a sick kid, I found a coat check stub in the pocket of her camel coat. It was from a hotel bar in Lower Manhattan. Not the club she had named. Not even close. I sat on the edge of the bed with that little stub in my hand, looking at the printed date and time as if it might turn into something else if I stared long enough. Maybe she had stopped there after, maybe the dinner moved, maybe she had a drink with somebody, maybe. Maybe. The mind will do almost anything to protect the house it lives in. There was also her phone. Not some glowing red siren. Not lipstick on a collar. Just a change in posture. Melody had always guarded her time more than her devices. We were not a couple who performed openness by swapping passwords for fun. We had privacy, and I thought that was adult. But now I noticed how often she turned the screen away, not because she had something specific to hide, but because her body had developed a reflex. Like someone shielding a flame from wind. One Sunday afternoon, while we were both in the den pretending to rest, she got a notification and glanced at it. I saw only part of the preview before she cleared it. It said timing changed. She stood almost immediately. Need to take this upstairs, she said. It's about tomorrow. I watched her go. My chest felt hot, then cold. He wants what? And why was a man named only by pronoun changing anything on a Sunday afternoon inside my house? At work, I was still useful because usefulness is a discipline. Fire does not care if your marriage is bending. Smoke does not adjust for private humiliation. On a Tuesday in early spring, we had a top-floor electrical fire in a pre-war building where the hallways were narrow, and the stairwell turned the smoke into a throat. I took the first-in crew up, made the hallway, checked extension, pushed into the rear bedroom, and knocked down what could have become much worse if the old wiring had gotten another 10 minutes. Afterwards, outside on the sidewalk, one of the probies said, "Good stop, Cap." I nodded and pulled off my mask. The air was sharp and cold. Somewhere above us, tenants leaned out of windows trying to ask questions they did not have words for. "Good stop," I repeated. It struck me then, standing there in soot and daylight, that one of the cruelest things about private betrayal is that it often unfolds while you are still being competent everywhere else. You keep showing up, keep solving problems, keep carrying weight, and the other person goes right on building a separate structure inside the life you are sustaining. That realization did something to me. It made me less sentimental, not colder exactly, cleaner. I began documenting rather than merely noticing. Dates, claimed events, actual returns, places mentioned, places implied. I kept it in a plain notebook in the glove compartment of my truck. No dramatic labels, no obsession, just entries the way I log operational details after a fire scene. Wednesday, said roadshow dinner, home at 8:47. No food smell, no alcohol. Friday, said late diligence call. Hair smelled of cigar smoke. Sunday, text preview. Timing changed. He wants Tuesday. Mentioned banker breakfast Thursday. Calendar window visible Wednesday night showed media training. I told myself I was doing it to reassure myself, that the pattern would collapse under scrutiny and I would feel foolish and relieved. Instead, the pattern hardened. Then came the insider information. That phrase sounds louder than the way I first encountered it. It did not arrive with handcuffs or headlines. It arrived as a joke that was not really a joke. Melody and I were at a backyard dinner in Scarsdale, hosted by a board member from her company and his wife, people with an outdoor kitchen larger than my first apartment. There were 12 of us, and most of the table spoke fluent market theater. I can get along with those people well enough. I do not need to love somebody to eat their food. Melody sat to my left. Across from us was a venture partner named Simon Kress, younger than the rest, too polished, the kind of man who laughed half a second before everyone else so it looked as though he was allowing the joke to happen. At one point, the conversation drifted to a recent acquisition rumor in the sector. Everybody did the rich person dance around material non-public information, pretending their opinions floated free of access. Simon lifted his glass and looked at Melody. Well, some people at this table know more than they can say. Melody smiled but did not answer. Simon added, careful, Mel. Captain America over there looks too honest to protect you if the SEC knocks. Everybody laughed. Even Melody. She rested a hand on my forearm and said, Dustin doesn't hear these conversations. The table moved on. Somebody mentioned Hampton's traffic. Somebody else asked about schools. But I sat there with the taste of that sentence in my mouth. Dustin doesn't hear these conversations. Maybe she meant it playfully. Maybe she meant I was not in their world. Maybe she meant I was safe because I had no use for market gossip. Or maybe she meant exactly what it sounded like, that I existed near sensitive things without being considered part of the risk calculation. On the drive home, I asked, what was that comment about? What comment, Captain America? SEC. You not being able to say things. She looked out the passenger window. Simon thinks he's funny. He is. Was it a joke? Mostly. Mostly. I kept my eyes on the road. The words sat between us like a hot tool dropped on concrete. Were you feeding anybody information? I asked. She laughed once too quickly. God, no. What do you think I do all day? I think you know better than most people what matters and when it matters. That is not the same thing. No, I said. It is. She turned toward me then. You're doing that thing lately, where every question sounds like it has another question behind it. I let a few seconds pass before speaking. Maybe because every answer you give sounds like it had another version first. That shut the car down, not the engine. We rode the rest of the way in silence, and when we got home she went straight upstairs. I sat in the dark in the driveway for another minute after shutting off the truck, hands still on the wheel, and realized I was no longer merely suspicious. I was angry. Not blow-up angry. Not break-a-door angry. The kind of anger that makes a man careful because he knows careless emotion is a gift to the person hiding things. At the station, careful anger is useful. It keeps you from rushing a search without checking the floor. It keeps you from believing the first room is the only room. It keeps you alive. That week I had a conversation with Lou Mancini, a battalion chief who had been around long enough to make cynicism look like a dietary choice. We were behind the house after drill, drinking bad coffee from paper cups while the younger guys argued about baseball. You ever get a feeling at home you can't prove? I asked him. Lou glanced at me sideways. That a fire question or a marriage question? Depends on the answer. He snorted. Marriage then. Fire his meth. I waited. He said, if it's at home, either you're wrong and you need to stop feeding it, or you're right and you need to stop pretending time will make it kinder. Time just lets rot spread. Lou had been divorced twice, which in some men makes wisdom unusable. In him, it only made it cleaner. You ever sit on it too long? I asked. He looked into the cup like there might be a better version of the coffee at the bottom. First wife, yeah. I kept wanting one sentence that made the whole thing simple. Never got it. You usually get a pile of small, ugly truths instead. That stayed with me. A pile of small, ugly truths. That was exactly what I had. The hard piece of proof came because Melody finally got sloppy in the one area she thought she controlled perfectly, which was language. She had an IPO scheduling packet printed out at home because our office printer handled color better than hers. It was late, and she had gone upstairs to take a call after sending a page to print. I heard the machine start in the study and walked in to grab my own paperwork, an insurance form I had printed earlier. Her packet was sitting in the tray. I did not touch it at first. Then I saw a highlighted line on the top page. Executive Transport, revised for post-event dispersal. Beneath it was a table with names, pickup locations, and destinations. Her name appeared twice for the same evening. Once under official return options to Bronxville. Once lower on the page in a revised line added in a different font, paired with initials instead of a full name and a private address in Greenwich. Private address. Initials. No reason for a chief operating officer to be privately routed to a hidden location after a formal investor event unless there was one very obvious reason. I stood there reading the page while my pulse ticked in my throat. Melody's footsteps sounded overhead, moving away from the staircase. She was still on the call. I took a photo of the page with my phone, then another. Then I put everything back exactly where it had been. Greenwich was not impossible from their event. It was not even shocking for their circle. But the revised transport line mattered because it had no business existing in plain language, unless someone assumed no one at home would ever read it. I spent the next day off in my truck outside a coffee shop in Larchmont, staring at my phone and telling myself not to do what I was about to do. Then I called a man named Pete Romano. Pete had been a fire investigator years ago, then left to do private work when he realized he preferred facts to administrative meetings. We had crossed paths on insurance fraud cases, and one ugly arson set by a husband trying to erase a second family. Pete was the sort of man who wore old windbreakers and remembered everything. "You need something," he said after hello. "Maybe," I said. "That's a yes." I told him less than half of it. Enough to establish the concern. Enough to feel embarrassed. Enough that if he judged me, he did it silently. "What do you want?" he asked when I finished. "Not drama. Not illegal. I need to know if my wife is lying about where she's going and who she's with. I need proof I can stand on." He said, "Then you need surveillance, not imagination." "Can you do it?" "I can. Question is whether you really want me to." That annoyed me, maybe because it was fair. I said if I didn't, I would have called a priest. He exhaled through his nose, which was as close to laughter as Pete ever got. "Send me what you have." For the next 10 days, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was still Dustin, husband, captain, man who knew where the spare batteries were, and which grocery store carried the soup Melody liked when she got sick. In the other, I was a man waiting for the structure to fail in a way no one could deny. Pete was good. Calm, minimal, no dramatic updates, just timestamp notes and, when necessary, photos. Melody said she had an executive dinner in Midtown. Pete sent me a message a little after 9. Subject: departed official venue at 8:17 with white male, late 50s, identified as Graham Vale. Entered private car. Arrived private residence, Greenwich 902. Graham Vale, chief executive officer, face of the company, married. The initials in the transport schedule made sense now. GV. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that message until the screen dimmed. The affair had a body now, a name, an age, a location, and because pain is greedy, it immediately wanted more. Was it only sex? Was it leverage? Was it long-running? Was it recent? Did anybody else know? Was Simon's joke really a joke? Had Melody been trading access and timing in a way that made everything around her dirty? Pete followed for several nights. Not every night. Enough to establish routine. Enough to show it was not one mistake or one weak evening. Melody met Graham at the Greenwich house twice more, at a hotel suite once, and once at a private dining room in the city before the two of them left through separate exits and entered the same garage 3 blocks apart. Longer than expected. That was the part that hollowed me out, because somewhere inside suspicion, a man still bargains for limits. You catch yourself hoping the betrayal is shallow, that it started recently, that it was stupid and impulsive, and therefore somehow smaller. What Pete gave me instead was continuity. A maintained system. They had structure, timing, workarounds, coordination. This was not a slip. One night, after getting another of Pete's updates, I went downstairs and stood in the den in the dark while Melody slept upstairs. The room held all the familiar things. Her throw blanket over the arm of the couch. My old Fire Academy photo on the shelf. A legal pad on the side table with her handwriting across the top margin. A grocery list that included lemons, yogurt, and batteries. I remember that stupid list because it made everything else look impossible. How could a woman order an affair, private cars, executive lies, and maybe insider conversations, then come home and write batteries on a yellow pad like the rest of us? That is how people do it, I guess. They lace the ordinary through the rot so both can survive longer. I did not sleep much after that. At work, I could function because work has sequence. At home, sequence dissolved. I almost confronted her 3 times and stopped all 3. The first was over breakfast when she mentioned, casually, that Graham had been under impossible pressure, and everybody was doing their best to shield him. I looked at her over my coffee and almost said, shield him from what exactly? Being alone. Instead, I buttered toast and asked whether the Sloanes were still hosting on Saturday. The second was in bed when her phone vibrated on the nightstand and she rolled toward it in her sleep, checked the screen, then sat up to clear something before lying back down. I watched her silhouette in the dark and almost said, "Who is he to you when I'm in this room?" I said nothing. The third was the worst. We were in the grocery store of all places, standing near produce, arguing mildly about avocados. Melody reached out and adjusted my collar the way she had done 100 times over 12 years, a tiny familiar act, and for half a second I saw the life I thought I had and the life she had built beside it. The overlap was so grotesque I had to walk away and pretend I needed sparkling water from the next aisle. Living inside suspicion changes time. Every hour thickens. Memory stops being a comfort and becomes a forensic tool. You revisit old nights, old trips, old remarks at parties, the promotion she got faster than expected, the way Graham had once put a hand at the small of her back in a room full of people, and I dismissed it as executive familiarity. The 2 times she came back from leadership, retreats with a gift from the hotel boutique, and a kind of brightness that had nothing to do with sleep or success. I remembered a dinner from almost a year earlier, before any of this had crossed my mind. Melody had been quiet on the drive home. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "I'm just tired of men who think every room belongs to them." I thought she meant donors or board members or bankers. Maybe she did. Maybe she meant the man she would later climb into a car with. The hardest part of the middle was not the evidence. It was the coexistence. Melody remained, in many ways, herself. She asked about my shift. She sent soup to the station when one of our guys got hurt. She texted me on a rainy afternoon, "Don't forget your heavier jacket," and I hated her for being attentive in a language that still worked on me. One Sunday, she wanted to watch a movie. We sat on the couch with takeout and made it halfway through before she fell asleep against my shoulder. I stayed still for 40 minutes, feeling the weight of her there, knowing where she had been 2 nights earlier, knowing I had photographs in a locked drawer upstairs, and for the first time I understood why some men prefer open cruelty. Open cruelty is easier to leave. Tenderness from a liar is an accelerant. It makes the fire take hold in the places you thought were wet and safe. Pete's final report came in a plain envelope. Dates, photos, locations, patterns, enough for a lawyer, enough for me. Included in it was something I had not been expecting and maybe should have. A photograph of Melody and Graham seated close together at a restaurant booth, her hand on his wrist, both of them leaning over a phone screen. Pete had zoomed the frame just enough to capture the text on the phone display they were reviewing. It was a financial news alert draft. Embargoed, internal, time-stamped before public release. I stared at that image a very long time. Maybe they were only looking. Maybe she was not feeding anything. But once confidential information and private relationships sit in the same booth, the difference stops mattering in the ways that ruin people. The SEC seed in the whole thing stopped being a joke and became a live wire. I took everything to an attorney named Rachel Stein in White Plains, recommended by a man on my job whose sister had used her in a divorce involving concealed compensation, and a very dumb husband with a boat registration in his girlfriend's name. Rachel was the opposite of Pete, polished where he was weathered, but they shared the same essential quality. They were not impressed by deception. It was just material to them. She read through the file without reacting much. When she finished, she folded her hands and said, "You have infidelity. You have potential financial exposure through shared assets, if anything regulatory develops around her or the company. And you have enough evidence to act before the IPO party, if that matters to you." "It does," I said. "Because of the public setting, because of the company event, because if she thought the image mattered more than the structure underneath, then the image was where the truth needed to meet her." Rachel said, "Then we prepare in two directions: protective filings and controlled timing." Controlled timing. That phrase soothed something in me. For the first time since the house began heating inside the walls, I had a plan instead of a pulse. Over the next week, I moved quietly. Separate accounts where appropriate. Documentation of pre-existing assets. Updated beneficiaries were permitted. Copies of tax records. Insurance reviews. Anything that could be shielded from chaos got shielded. Rachel coordinated with a financial specialist who understood what happens when a senior executive's private life intersects with regulatory risk and marital property. I did not have to become a market man to understand the essentials. If Melody had crossed lines around privileged information, I wanted no confusion about where I stood and what I knew. At home, she seemed busier and brighter. That false brightness people wear when the external payoff is close enough to taste. The IPO celebration was set for a Friday night in Manhattan at a rooftop venue leased out for the occasion. Executives, board, bankers, press, investors, spouses, everything polished to the point of unreality. "You'll come, right?" she asked me on Tuesday while we were brushing our teeth side by side like strangers acting out a marriage. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She met my eyes in the mirror. There was caution in her then, finally. Maybe she had noticed my withdrawal, even if she misread its cause. Maybe she was sensing the same structural weakness I had sensed weeks earlier, and hoping charm would serve as a temporary brace. "I think you've been far away lately," she said. I rinsed, set down the toothbrush, and said, "Maybe I've just been listening." "To what?" I looked at her reflection. The room, the mirror lights, the expensive calm, all of it waiting to break. "Inconsistencies," I said. She smiled a little, but not with relief. "With assessment." Then she stepped closer, rested a hand against my chest, and said, "After Friday, I'll breathe again." That line stayed with me because it was true in a way she did not intend. After Friday, one of us would. The day of the party, I worked a shorter administrative shift, came home, and dressed in a dark suit I usually reserved for funerals and department events, where emotion needed to be kept under formal control. Melody came downstairs later in a black dress that should have taken the room and almost did. She looked incredible, controlled, sharp, exactly the woman people trusted in public, because she looked as if she trusted herself absolutely. "You clean up well," she said. "So do you." In the car into the city, she talked about the venue, the guest list, who mattered, who needed watching, which interviewer might try to bait Graham into making forward-looking statements, and why one analyst from a particular firm could not be left alone with alcohol and a microphone. I listened and drove. At one red light, she touched my wrist and said, "Thank you for doing tonight. I know this world isn't really yours." I kept my eyes on traffic. "No," I said. "It is." The rooftop was all glass, steel, soft gold light, and carefully curated celebration. There were branded step-and-repeat backdrops, trays of champagne, a jazz trio in one corner pretending not to be expensive, and enough people performing relief to make the air feel synthetic. Through the windows, the city looked distant and obedient, like it had agreed to serve as scenery for other people's momentum. Melody moved into that environment the way I move into a fireground. Purposeful, calm, fully fluent. I watched her greet board members, touch elbows, laugh lightly, make introductions, and once, only once, exchange a look with Graham Vale that lasted no more than a second and contained years. He was exactly what men like him usually are. Tall, silver at the temples, relaxed in the way Only men protected by money and deference can relax in public. His wife was there too, which did not surprise me as much as it should have. Her presence made the whole thing filthier and more predictable at the same time. I stood with a drink I barely touched and felt the evening gather pressure. Rachel was there, not as my visible attorney, but as a guest of one of the private equity people she knew professionally. Pete was there too, unbelievably, looking like somebody's older cousin who had made money in construction and did not care about anybody's opinion. He gave me one glance from across the room and looked away. Just before 9, the company's chair tapped a glass and called everyone toward the central area for remarks. Graham would speak first, then Melody, then a banker, then everybody would pretend the future was guaranteed. I moved closer through the crowd, not fast, not slow. My heart was steady. That surprised me. Maybe because by then emotion had burned through and left only structure. In overhaul after a fire, you move carefully through what is left, opening walls, checking hidden spaces, making sure nothing keeps smoldering where it can flare later. That was what tonight was. Overhaul, not explosion. Graham took the microphone and began with a polished line about vision, resilience, and the extraordinary team that had brought them to this moment. People smiled, glasses lifted, cameras angled. Then Melody's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, only for a second, but I was close enough to see her face change. Not panic, recognition, some message that belonged to the hidden system, arriving at the worst possible time. She started to move away from the cluster of executives, likely to answer it. That was when Rachel stepped up beside two dark-suited men I had not seen enter. Federal-looking men, though I did not know if they were federal. They wore the kind of expression men wear when they are not there socially, and do not need anyone to enjoy that fact. One of them leaned toward Melody and said, "Low but not low enough, please come with us." There it was, the line from the prompt of her life, spoken by men she had not invited. The room did not stop all at once. It staggered. Graham faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned. Cameras hesitated, then sharpened. Melody stared at the men, then at Rachel, then at me. "Dustin," she said. It was not a question. More like she had suddenly located the edge of the floor. Graham stepped down from the mic area, voice tight. "What is this?" One of the men addressed him by full name and asked if they could speak privately regarding matters related to communications, access, and pre-offering information. The whole room learned a new way to breathe in that instant. Not louder, thinner. Melody looked at me the way people look at the one stable thing they think remains when the rest of the architecture gives way. I walked toward her, not to rescue, to finish. She said, barely moving her lips, "Tell me you didn't do this." I stopped close enough that only she and Graham could clearly hear the first part. "You built a private system," I said. "You didn't slip. You maintained it." Her face emptied. That line landed harder than anger could have. Graham tried to recover posture, which in men like him is often the last refuge before humiliation. "This is inappropriate," he said. At an event like this, I said, still calm, "image is the only thing either of you ever thought was real." He stared at me. Melody swallowed once. Her eyes had gone bright, not with tears yet, but with the body's first betrayal of composure. "Dustin, please, no," I said. Then I gave her the sentence I had been carrying for days, the one that defined the whole structure. "You turned your marriage into a holding pattern while you tried to cash in somewhere else." She closed her eyes for the length of a breath. When she opened them, she looked older. Not physically, structurally, like something load-bearing inside her had cracked and could no longer pretend it was decorative. Around us, the room was entering that ugly phase where money and status try to calculate faster than shame spreads. Board members pulling phones, a banker stepping away, someone from communications already whispering damage control language to someone else. Graham's wife, white-faced and motionless near the back, as though she had just watched a locked door appear in her own home and realized it had been there for years. One of the dark-suited men repeated, "Miss Sullivan, Mr. Vale, we need you to come with us now." Melody looked at me once more. "You were watching me," she said. I shook my head. I was listening, that was all. Then I stepped back. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a speech. I did not need to. The room had already done the rest. Melody went with them because there was nowhere not to go. Graham followed, trying to keep some executive dignity around his collapse, which made it worse. Rachel appeared at my side a few moments later and asked softly if I was ready to leave. Yes, I said. Are you sure? Yes. We took the elevator down in silence. In the lobby, the city looked normal through the glass. Cabs, light, wet pavement from a recent drizzle. People outside, another event laughing, as if the world had not just split open 20 floors above them. Rachel walked with me to the curb. You did well, she said. I hated that phrase right then, though I knew what she meant. There is nothing about standing still, while your marriage publicly reveals its rot that feels like doing well. But maybe she meant I kept my dignity. Maybe she meant I did not hand Melody a scene she could later recast as cruelty. Maybe she meant I remained factual when emotion would have been easier. What happens now, I asked. Now, she said, people with expensive lawyers start moving very quickly. I laughed once through my nose. Good. On the drive home, Melody called 3 times. I did not answer. Then she texted, "Please talk to me." Another message. It is not what it looked like. Then, after 10 minutes, I never meant for this to happen. That one almost got a response because it was the first honest sentence she had written in weeks. Of course, she had not meant for this to happen. No liar means for consequence to arrive wearing credentials. I said nothing. At home, the house was still. I took off my jacket, loosened my tie, and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the overhead light. The under-cabinet lamps cast a soft strip across the counters. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked once and stopped. I thought I would feel triumph. I did not. Mostly I felt emptied out, cleaned by force. A fire burns through, and afterwards the structure is quieter than you expect. Not peaceful, just stripped of illusion. That was how the kitchen felt. That was how I felt. Melody came home sometime after midnight. She looked like someone who had tried to repair herself in a bathroom and failed in every place that mattered. Makeup touched up, hair reset, dress still perfect, eyes ruined. "Dustin," she said from the doorway. I stayed seated. She came closer slowly, as if approaching an injured animal or a man with a weapon. I had neither. I had only certainty, which made her more careful than anger would have. I need to explain. I looked at the empty chair across from me. Sit down. She sat. For a few seconds she only held the edge of the table with both hands. I did not give anything, so she had to begin. It started because he needed someone he could trust, she said. I almost smiled at that. Not from amusement. From how predictable the first lie of truth becomes when people are cornered. No, I said. Start with the first thing that was actually true. She stared at me, then looked down. We got close during the preparation, she said. He depended on me. I was solving everything. We were together constantly. It crossed lines. That is still not the first true thing. Her mouth tightened. You want me to say I like the power? Yes. A long silence passed. Then she nodded once. I like the power, she said. There it was at last. The room felt clearer for having it in the open. She went on. I liked that he listened. I liked that he trusted me with things nobody else got near. I liked being essential. And sleeping with him was part of being essential. She flinched. Don't make it uglier than it was. I leaned back in the chair. That sentence did more to end us than the affair did. The reflex to protect the shape of the thing instead of the damage it did. She saw that too late. Her shoulders lowered a little, the first surrender I had seen from her all night. Yes, she said. It was part of it. For how long? She named a number of months that fit what Pete had found and also went back further than my best hopes had allowed. I let it land without reacting. Were you passing information? Not directly. Not directly is not no. She pressed her palms flat to the table. He would talk. I would know things. Sometimes I warned him about timing, about who was asking what, about what might leak and from where. I didn't think I held up a hand. Do not say you didn't think. That too landed. She took a breath that shook at the end. I thought I could control it, she said. That was probably the truest sentence of the night. You thought you could control him, the company, The timing, the image me, and the marriage all at once, I said. You thought those were separate fires. She looked up slowly. And they were. No, I said. They were all one structure. That was the profession lens again, though I did not think of it that way in the moment. I was just speaking the only language left that felt honest to me. She asked if I still loved her. That question should have broken me. Instead, it clarified something. I love who I thought you were, I said. I don't know what to do with who you turned out to be. Tears came then, quietly, not theatrically. Melody had never been a messy crier. Even now, even shattered, she leaked pain in controlled lines. I never wanted to lose this, she said, looking around the kitchen. I nodded, but you were willing to risk it every day. She had no answer because there was none worth hearing. Rachel had prepared me for the practical conversation, so I kept it practical. Guest room for now. Communication through counsel on financial matters. No access to certain accounts. No discussion with me about regulatory issues beyond what affected our legal separation. She listened like somebody hearing terms from outside her own life, which in a sense she was. The private life she had built had finally collided with the real one. At the staircase, she stopped and turned back. Did you ever think about just asking me? I considered that. Yes, I said. 100 times. Why didn't you? Because by the time I knew enough to ask, I already knew you were practicing answers. She stood there another second, then went upstairs. In the days that followed, the world did what it always does around a public implosion involving money. It pretended to be shocked while rearranging itself in anticipation. News trickled without becoming headline catastrophe, at least not immediately. There were reports about review of pre-offering controls, internal inquiries, executive leave, postponement language, statements drafted by lawyers with all the humanity steamed out of them. Graham stepped aside temporarily for personal reasons, which is one of those phrases that should be treated like smoke under a door. Melody was placed on leave pending review. People we knew called with concern, so delicately phrased it sounded rehearsed. I went to work. I came home. I met Rachel. I signed things. That was the clean part. The dirty part was memory. Memory does not respect legal sequence. It arrives when it wants. Folding a shirt and remembering her hands on my shoulders after my first promotion. Passing a restaurant and recalling a birthday dinner where she looked across a candle at me like I was enough. Hearing somebody on television say strategic and feeling the whole kitchen from that last night rise up again. But the intensity changed. Not quickly, not nobly, just steadily, like a contained fire losing fuel. A week after the party, I ran into Simon Kress outside the courthouse in White Plains. I had a filing appointment. He had the hollow look of a man who had slept in a suit and was now pretending it was a choice. Captain, he said. Simon. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets and glanced away. Hell of a mess. Yes. For what it's worth, I didn't know how far it went. I believed him, which annoyed me. Of course not everybody knew everything. Systems like that work precisely because most people only know the part that keeps them comfortable. Your joke at dinner, I said. How much of that was a joke? He winced a little. More than I'd like now. Less than it sounded like at the time. That was probably true too. He looked at me. She wasn't the only one who got close to him because it was useful. But she was the one who made it look normal. I held his gaze. That may have been the cruelest thing anybody said to me in the whole process, because it explained Melody better than any apology she had tried to assemble. Made it look normal. Yes, that was her gift. That was the rot. At home, the house changed quickly once two people stopped pretending it was shared in the same way. Melody moved through it carefully, temporarily, as if she were staying in a corporate rental after some internal disaster. We crossed paths only when necessary. Her brother came and removed boxes. Rachel handled timing. There were discussions about statements, property, disclosures, and what happened if any regulatory matter widened. One evening, as she was collecting files from the study, she paused by the door and said, I was happy with you, you know. I was at the desk reviewing insurance forms. I looked up and said, happiness that needs a secret second life isn't happiness. It's appetite. She absorbed that, nodded once and left. No tears that time. Maybe by then, even she was tired of performing them. The actual separation happened without spectacle. No slammed doors. No lawn drama. No friends arriving to witness righteousness. Just an agreed date, a moving truck, paperwork, and an empty closet that looked smaller than the marriage it represented. The first night alone in the house, I expected silence to feel like punishment. It felt like air, not easy air, not joyful, but breathable. I slept downstairs in the den, because the bedroom still held too much choreography. Around 3 in the morning, I woke from a dream I could not remember and listened to the house. No footsteps overhead. No phone vibration from another room. No sense of another person maintaining a hidden timetable just outside my vision. Only the furnace clicking on and the branch of the maple near the window brushing once against the siding. Contained, then peaceful, that difference mattered. In the months after, the case around the company never became the spectacular criminal bonfire some people in town predicted, but it scorched enough careers to leave visible damage. The offering was delayed, then restructured, then smaller. Graham resigned for reasons that would never be fully explained in public, and did not need to be. Melody did not go back. There were settlements, non-disclosure agreements, reputational triage, and enough professional exile to satisfy anyone looking for external consequence. But by then external consequence mattered less to me. That surprises people when they ask, though I wish they would ask less. They want a revenge ending, because revenge is easier to narrate than clarity. Clarity is quieter. It does not pose for anybody. My real ending came in ordinary places. In the kitchen, making eggs on a Sunday, and realizing I was not bracing for anyone's arrival. On a shift, standing with my crew after a stubborn attic job, and feeling useful in a way that did not have to compete with private shame. In the driveway, one crisp morning, scraping frost from the windshield and noticing that my body no longer tightened when I saw a text arrive from an unknown number. In the grocery store, months later, passing the produce section where I once had to walk away because avocados and betrayal shared an aisle, and feeling nothing but the need to buy onions. That is healing, I think, not grand forgiveness, not instant wisdom, just ordinary life reclaiming square footage from damage. A while after the separation, Lou asked me how I was doing. We were behind the house again with bad coffee. Same paper cups. Same drifting smell of diesel and wet concrete. Better, I said. You look it. I nodded toward the cup. Maybe the coffee got worse, so everything else seems improved. Lou laughed. Then he said, you ever get the one sentence you wanted? I thought about Melody at the kitchen table, about the rooftop, about all the mixed excuses and revised schedules and careful posture. No, I said. I got a pile of ugly truths. He lifted his cup slightly. That's usually the sentence. He was right. It was enough. The final time Melody and I spoke in person was not dramatic. We met at Rachel's office to sign the last round of documents. Melody looked composed in a pale gray suit, thinner than before, hair shorter, face less certain of its effect. She asked how work was. I said busy. I asked how her mother was. She said better. Then there was a pause where old selves might once have stepped in and tried to create tenderness out of wreckage. They did not. Before we stood to leave, she said, I did love you, Dustin. I believe she believed that. Maybe she even meant it. But meaning something badly is not the same as living it honestly. I said I know. That was all. No theatrical final line. No public cutting remark. That part had already been done where it needed to be done. What remained was simpler and in some ways harsher. She walked out of the office. I watched the door close behind her and felt no triumph, only completion. Now when I think about the beginning, about those early nights when she came home too soon from evenings that were supposedly running long, I understand why it bothered me so quickly. It was not only the lie. It was the direction of the lie. Everything in her story pointed one way while her body, her timing, and her atmosphere pointed another. In a fire, conflicting signals save you if you trust them in time. At home, they can save you there too, though the rescue feels uglier. I used to think strength in a marriage meant endurance, staying, absorbing, giving the other person room to be flawed, stressed, changing, difficult. Some of that is true. Marriage requires stamina. But now I think strength also means refusing to help somebody maintain a structure that is already failing under hidden heat. It means recognizing when your loyalty has been converted into cover. That recognition changed me, made me harder in a few places, cleaner in others, more aware, certainly. Masculine and aware, if I had to put it into the kind of phrase people like to borrow for internet captions. But the real thing feels less performative than that. It feels like knowing exactly what you can live with and what you never should have been asked to. I do not hate Melody. That would tether me to her too closely. I understand her better than I want to. She was built for rooms where power moved through smiles and timing and small permissions. She got used to being the person who could keep 10 spinning plates in the air and started believing gravity was optional for her. Men like Graham mistook appetite for admiration. Women like Melody mistook control for immunity. Somewhere in that exchange, my marriage became collateral. Collateral burns too. The structure never cares whether the spark meant to be there. That is the last truth I have for you. Not loud, not cinematic, just true. She thought she was managing risk. She was only choosing what would burn first. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to Reddit Ride, like the video, and leave a comment. That support helps the channel grow, and it helps these stories reach the people who know what quiet damage feels like before anyone else can smell the smoke. By the time she understood what she had lost, I was already out of the building.